Can we borrow from another YouTuber and answer a question that's already been answered, just with a different spin on it? Well, I don't know, but we're sure as hell going to give it a try. So let's see how it works out, shall we? Stick around and see why philosophy fails so badly when it comes to God. We're going to do some more weird stuff around here, and I know I've said that a couple of times, but this might be the weirdest. A while back, Matt Dillahunty answered a comment on his Patreon channel, and it was a great answer to a pretty sad, stupid question. And it's the same kind of thing that I've been asked many, many, many times before, and have addressed, at least in part, a couple of times. Yet those same questions just keep on coming. Unfortunately, my theist commenters tend to be pretty incoherent, and nobody has managed to ask a question like this in a way that's a springboard to a video. So I'm going to just steal from Matt and answer the same question. I hope he doesn't mind. Just imagine somebody smart enough to ask that around here. Wouldn't that be nice? Because this is why philosophy is the absolutely wrong tool for the job, and the religious don't seem to be able to get that through their heads. Now, before we get started, I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that Matt did a bad job answering this question, because he absolutely did not. I've put a link to his original video down in the description, and I want you to go over and give it a watch to get his take on it, because I think he did an excellent job. I'm actually going to agree with a lot of what he said, but I think I've got enough new material to make it worthwhile for us to take a second look, because this comes up all the time. Now, we did a 4-video series a long time ago now on the religious philosophical arguments for God and why every single one of them failed. Therefore, God isn't a rational way to look at the world. You don't just get to arbitrarily assign a solution to a problem for which you have absolutely no evidence. But that's exactly what they want to do. So let's get on to the question at hand. Category error. The question of whether God exists is not a scientific question in the first place. It is a philosophical question, metaphysics particularly. Whee! This is the basic misunderstanding that we have. Now, Matt explored this a little bit, but I'm going to go into it in some more detail. Science addresses that which exists in the real world. And that's why I say that philosophy can't tell you anything about a new species of wombat. It is the wrong tool for the job. Philosophy deals with concepts and ideas, and there's no mechanism in philosophy for making determinations about real things, only about the concepts of those things. You can't perform real-world experiments using only philosophy, because those mechanisms simply don't exist. Of course, you will get the philosophy fanboys exclaiming, "But everything is philosophy!" No, not really. You can use philosophy to build the ideas behind the methodologies of science, but it isn't the same as being science. Otherwise, you'd have philosophers in long white coats working in laboratories performing experiments, and you don't see that, do you? Because that's not what philosophy is. Therefore, the religious really have two options. If they want to say that the question of God isn't scientific, then they're just admitting that God isn't real. God doesn't exist in the real world, because that's exactly what science would be useful for. If science inherently can't examine it, then they're admitting that it's imaginary, that it's something that exists only in your head. And if that's where you want to go with that, go right ahead. anything that interacts with the real world, which is what God supposedly does, that falls within the realm of science. So you've lost. If God only exists within philosophy, then God is only a concept or an idea. Now, if that's the way you want to go, then I will agree with you. Gods are nothing more than ideas. But that isn't what religions bank on, is it? And you have to head off philosophy fanboys at the pass who might say, but everything is real because ideas are just brain states. Yeah, but that's not how it works. The brain state is real. The idea contained within the brain state isn't. It's just a concept. If it was, then we wouldn't need philosophy at all. We could just make do with science. And I guess you people would be out of a job. So right now, whoever wrote this is just fundamentally wrong about everything. But let's address the metaphysics part, just for fun. Now, metaphysics, by definition, is the branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, including abstract concepts such as being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. Now, metaphysics has, shall we say, some problems inherent in it. That's not to say it's completely useless, but it starts off with a bunch of base assumptions that are not demonstrable in reality, especially when you get to things like religious metaphysics, which assumes the existence of a god or gods before they even get going. Because if we're looking at what actually happened, then we're talking about science, not philosophy. And if you're talking about the meaning behind it, then you're assuming a priori that there is a meaning at all. What does it mean? Well, maybe it doesn't mean anything. Did you ever think about that? Maybe it's just there. But I want a purpose. Well, too bad. Just because you want it, that doesn't mean it's real. This is where philosophy, at least in my opinion, goes entirely off the rails because it's concerned more about appealing to the human ego than it does to the intellect. This is exactly where philosophy starts to get into the noodling your navel territory because what you want doesn't matter. And I know a lot of people won't like that, but too bad. You have to deal with the real world. Get the hell over yourselves. Regarding the claim, we haven't provided a way of knowing anything beyond the limitations of the scientific method, logic. And here's someone who clearly doesn't understand logic. Logic is a tool, it's not a proof. You can't logic things into existence, whether you like that fact or not. If you look at the religious philosophical arguments, for example, I think this is the biggest failure of the religious because they don't comprehend how to actually use logic, well, logically. Because if you look at any of their arguments, they will start off with an emotionally comforting conclusion that they already believe completely on faith. They will dance through whatever syllogisms they can come up with in their head, and then, surprise, surprise, they come right back around to the conclusion that they already believed, because this is all just a giant exercise in circular reasoning. I want to believe X. Therefore, here's a bunch of steps designed specifically to get me back to X so that I can conclude X, and nobody should be surprised. But that's not logic, that's rationalization. That's why it's very important to understand the difference between reason and rationalization. Actual reason is following logic in an intellectual evaluation of the proposition. Rationalizations are wearing the illusion of reason while running around with the goalposts, trying to get to the conclusion that you're already desperate to reach. It's assuming that you're right without proving that you're right because you really, really, really want to be right. And that's not how logic works. We can use logic to know some things beyond the limitations of the scientific method with more certainty than any current scientific consensus, given absolute truth exists in logic, but never in science. No, that's not even close. Absolute truth is asserted in logic, but that doesn't mean it actually exists. Of course, a lot of that depends on how you define your terms, and if you notice, when you ask the religious to define their terminology, it's instant deer in the headlights time. They don't know, and they don't want to do it because that backs them into a corner. The religious love to play fast and loose with their terminology. Try getting them to come up with a positive definition for faith sometime, and then hold them to it. It's funny to watch them squirm. So let's define knowledge here, because that's really what truth is, for the sake of argument, the way that it's often done in philosophy. Justified true belief. It must actually be true, and it must actually have justification in the form of evidence behind it. Not claims, not wishful thinking, not faith, evidence. You must actually be able to demonstrate that it is true with something solid, and the religious never have any of that, do they? The second that you introduce faith and feelings, you are no longer in the realm of truth. You don't have knowledge, you have belief. You really just have wishful thinking, and so much of philosophy is just that. That's why you get so many mutually contradictory camps in philosophy, with each of them claiming to have truth. Well, how does that work exactly? Because, as I said at the beginning, their definitions of truth are pretty fluid. Well, that's not justified true belief, is it? Anyone can declare that they have absolute truth, but that doesn't mean that they have absolute truth. It's not like they can perform any experiments. I don't believe that the force of gravity on Earth is 9.8 meters per second squared. Okay, let's drop you out of an airplane without a parachute and see. Experiment, data, truth. But philosophy has none of that at all. All the declarations of absolute truth aside, they have no way to actually validate their versions of truth. Well, it seems good to me is as close as they can come. And this is exactly why not claiming absolutes in science is such a strength. We're not pretending that we know everything. We know we don't. We learn new things every single day. Now, that fact might scare some people, but too bad. This isn't about your fifis. It's never, ever, ever about your fifis. Unfortunately, far too much of philosophy is all fifi-based. It's based often on the desperate desire to understand things, even if you really don't. It's saying, well, we can figure this out, without any demonstrable basis for figuring out anything as it actually exists in the real world. For that, more often than not, you need science. But the religious are terrified of science because science takes one look at their belief and says, nope, zero evidence, not substantiated. And they don't like that, do they? All rational argumentation within philosophy and metaphysics, informed by existing scientific claims and laws of physics, clearly points to the existence of God. Literally all of it. Too bad you didn't actually mention a single one of them, right? Because we've looked at a lot of them around here, at least all the common ones, and they don't say anything of the sort. That's where the therefore God problem comes in. Just because you really like the idea of a God, that doesn't mean that a God exists. That's the purview of science, not philosophy. Philosophy can't demonstrate, in and of itself, that anything that exists within the real world actually exists. That's not its function. It can do no more than, say, four-legged animals exist, animals with horns exist, therefore unicorns exist. But that's not how that works, is it? That's just stupid. It's really what they're trying to do, though. They believe in a God, therefore that God answers all questions, but that's just nonsense. It's just a placeholder for their own ignorance. If they want to get to a God, then they have to demonstrate that a God exists first. And that's not going to come through philosophy. It's going to come through science. You know, that thing that says, where's your evidence? Because anything that doesn't leave behind evidence in the real world, that's functionally identical to something that doesn't exist. That's not to say that we may not find evidence later on. We certainly may. We do that all the time. But the time to believe in any proposition is when you have the evidence in hand, not because you just hope that somewhere down the line it might show up. The religious are jumping the rational shark, and they know it. They just don't care. He finishes up with a false trilemma, which I guess isn't much of a surprise. Well, it's got to be one of these three. Says who? Because I can think of lots of other options just off the top of my head. Let's look at them, though. They're held back scientism, causing them to falsely think philosophy is just opinions. That's not even a credible English sentence, but we're going to let that pass for now. This is something that we see from the religious all the time. Well, you're just too biased to see how right we are, says the people with all the demonstrable bias. Because we're not saying that you're wrong. We're just saying you haven't proven that you're right yet. Go ahead, present your actual evidence for any actual God in the actual real world. We're waiting. But they won't even try to do that because they know they can't. They just want to believe. And I'm sorry, but from everything that we have at the moment, your gods are imaginary. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And your duck isn't real. And I keep bringing up what they like because liking something doesn't actually mean anything. It is completely intellectually empty. It's a meaningless sentiment except to dumb people who don't care about the truth. You know, that verifiable, true belief based on evidence. Yeah, that thing they just don't have. So we started off with an empty claim and poisoning the well. Strike one. Number two is no better. They're completely logically incompetent. Yeah, I think it's painfully obvious who's logically incompetent here. This is just the old, tired religious canard. Well, you just don't understand. No, they're not the only ones who use that. Some of the philosophy fanboys do it too. We might see that in the comments after this video posts. But it's utterly meaningless. We do understand. We understand better than you do. We just don't come to your absurd conclusions because we actually care about the truth. We're not going to let our fifis rule our brains and get in the way of finding the actual facts, because the facts matter. That's what they're doing, and it's nothing that they should be proud of. Finally, though, he says, they're unaware of the 100+ logically valid and sound arguments for God. Yeah, such as. Now, I already mentioned how he didn't bring up any of them. That's pretty normal. And Matt pointed that out as well. It can't be that hard if there are so many. So present one. Present your best one. Just one that is both logically valid and sound. And I don't think you can do it because I don't think that any of them exist. Heck, I'll just throw that out there for any theist watching this video. Present one argument, just one, that is both logically valid, meaning it's in proper syllogistic format, and sound, meaning the premises are demonstrably true, and the conclusion is drawn directly and demonstrably from the premises provided. Just give me one of those, because I'm willing to bet you can't. Of course, they'll just make excuses. Well, you won't listen. No, you just don't have anything worth listening to. I think the reason they fail at this is because somewhere deep down they know that they can't. They know that all of their arguments are terrible. They appeal only to people who accept the conclusion on faith, so they just play make-believe and pretend all the evidence is on their side. But it's some kind of deep dark secret that nobody outside of their cabal gets to know. I mean, Christianity is a mystery religion after all, so it's a mystery. No, it's just a logical dodge of your rational responsibilities. maybe you should knock that off. You won't, of course, because that would be an admission that you were wrong all along, and you certainly can't have that. It would hurt your precious little fifis, which is why you people look so dumb. This isn't anything that you should be proud of. You should be ashamed. But since you're not thinking about anything logically or rationally, protestations from the poster aside, you just don't care. And that's one of the most pathetic things there is. Whoever wrote this is an imbecile. I don't know who it is. Matt didn't identify him, and that's fine. But they're stupid beyond belief. And sadly, they are hardly alone. Maybe it's time you all took a giant step backwards and reevaluated your lives, because this kind of thing is very, very telling. And it's not a good thing.